Just because that you're able to find somebody and click a button to connect doesn't mean that you've earned the right to do so. I'm Jason Seidman at Brandstorm. Welcome to a Communication Coaching Minute. When I turned 30, my mom looked at me and said, "Congratulations, you are now entitled to your opinion." So it's funny. So there's my mom saying on my 30th birthday, I'm entitled to my opinion. And really what she meant was nobody cares what a 20 or somebody in their 20s has to say. It's not that I didn't have good ideas, I just didn't have the life experience to back it up. I couldn't relate to the people I was talking to enough to be taken seriously. I had to overcome that. And obviously it's not like this binary thing where I went from didn't exist to exist, but you get the idea. Well, social media is kind of like turning 30, right? You have to figure out how to turn 30 on yourself intentionally, because the way social media works, you haven't earned the right to make the call. It's anyone can connect with me. I'm easy to find online, but just because you connect with me, I get connected to a lot. It doesn't mean that I'm obligated to return your connection. It doesn't mean I'm obligated into your conversation. It doesn't mean that I care who you are or why you're reaching out to me at all. So how do you break through that, and how do you make somebody care? It's actually not that hard. You just have to do it. So you can't age into it. We have to find another way. Here's the interesting thing. So I'm going to take you back in time to a client that I had about 20 years ago, right at shortly after 2000. This company had a whole lot of sales people who were struggling, and the managers didn't understand why they were struggling, because the internet had just kind of come of age, and the managers were like, hey, the hardest thing that we had to do when we were coming up through the ranks was find people. The internet makes it easy to find people. So what's their problem? They that barrier's gone. What's holding these kids back? And when I worked with them and I dug into it, what I found was the friction that the managers had experienced in finding people when they were younger, when they were young brokers looking people up. The steps that they had to take to overcome the friction helped them learn something about the people they were going to call. So by the time they got on the phone, they actually had an idea of where the person lived, what they were interested in, who they might know in common, and so they could actually launch into a conversation that was personable and kind of broke the ice. The other thing that happened, because there was friction in getting in touch with that person, when they did reach out and they got through, the person might be annoyed, but they also might be a little intrigued that they were found. So the combination was, as a potential buyer, as a prospect, I'd answer the phone, find a salesperson on the other end, be slightly put off, but also intrigued. How did you find me? And then I'd get this story. Oh, we both know Jim at the Human Rights Campaign, and I give there. I understand you're there, and and this is what I do. So I thought it might be interesting to reach out to you. Better, right? That's an actual conversation. Now, it's not a guaranteed conversation, but that's pretty good. So the managers had a certain level of success. Now, the kids coming up, they were not having that same level of success, right? If the managers were getting through to 2 out of 10 people, these kids coming up, they weren't even hitting 1 out of 10 in terms of their hit ratio. So what was happening? Well, it turns out the young brokers knew they could access anybody. That wasn't a problem. Their problems were different. Their problems were easy access meant, number one, somebody in the organization had already claimed all of the connections. All the good ones were claimed. Not that people were necessarily doing something with them, but they were easy to find. So, their peers, the company had grown, so they had more peers than the managers had. And one of their peers had already had this idea and gone through and just, I own this, this account is mine, this account is mine, this account is mine. All that's done. So they had a harder time finding people who hadn't been claimed. The other problem they had was there was no friction. So they didn't meet people along the way who knew the person, who could tell a story. They weren't finding their prospects through charitable events, not-for-profits, boards, network. They were finding them on the internet. They were literally looking them up as a name and a phone number. There's nothing to it. So they're calling somebody. The person who they're calling answers the phone, is not impressed that they had been found. They're just annoyed. They're annoyed because they're getting a lot of these calls now because recently their name and phone number hit the internet. And there's nothing to it. It's just a straight cold call. There's no connection. There's no click, gone. Social media, fast forward 20 years, just makes that problem a million times worse. You can connect with anybody and nobody gives a crap. If you want to actually make a connection matter, you have to introduce friction into your process. You have to make sure that you don't just connect and say, I want to talk to you, but you take a moment and you say, all right, I'm going to connect with this person. Before I do, let's see what I can learn about the person, introduce something personable into that email. And not just personable, but something that you can relate to. If I get a note from you, you say, hey, I saw on your Instagram you've been to Marfa, Texas. Okay, that's just creepy. Why are you bringing that up? That was years ago. If you were to introduce something and say, hey, admittedly, I was going deep. I saw on your Instagram that you were in Marfa, Texas. I know somebody who lives there. Or I was thinking of traveling there this year. Could you give me any restaurant tips? Or I was reading about that. I've always been fascinated. What was your favorite spot? Or, I was there 5 years ago. Did you visit the UFO thing? Whatever it is that you can relate to, that would help. Again, it's not a guarantee, but it replaces the old, right? The friction that used to exist naturally. It replaces that. You're introducing that friction. You're introducing that extra step of saying, I'm going to reach out to you, but before I do, I'm going to go look some stuff up so that the note that I send you cuts through the clutter, makes a connection, lets you know that I care, I took the time, and I'm worth reaching back out to. You still have to earn the connection. Just because that you're able to find somebody and click a button to connect doesn't mean that you've earned the right to do so any more than the fact that you have an opinion means that you've earned the right to the opinion, right? Until you do the research, until you've got the scar tissue, until you actually understand what it means. We all have opinions. Why is yours any better than anybody else's? So communication coaching moment today. If you're using social media to recruit, to sell, to get in touch with people where you are going to make an ask, make sure you take the extra step and earn the right to make that ask. I'm Jason Seiden of Brandstorm. If you like this kind of content, come over to the YouTube channel, subscribe, hit my notification bell for updates on my weekly video drops, and I'll talk to you soon.